Hi, my name is Teacher Lori, and I am submitting my teacher video for ASU Prep. And I wanted to give just a little bit of background. I am a Pennsylvania 7 through 12 certified language arts teacher, and I have my master's in education from Chestnut Hill College. I'm really excited to be able to apply for this position and think that I'd be a great fit. I chose a lesson today for the 10 minutes that is on deleting unnecessary words. And I selected this because I know from my previous experience as an English teacher, primarily with high school students, that writing can really be a struggle, even for some of the more advanced students. And so for this lesson, the idea is that I emphasize that even some of the most powerful writers still need to improve sentences. And so I tried to break it down by explaining that words, and I can just read from one of the pieces here. Many writers clog their work with words that don't add to the meaning of the sentence, and that's true of published freelancers, not just college freshmen. I appreciate a dense, descriptive style, Faulkner, Lawrence, Pynchon, but there's a difference between rich prose and a forest of dead wood. So the idea with this lesson is that I give a couple different examples. I'm going to try to share. I have a couple Word documents, but for the first part of the lesson, I am comparing passages, and I don't know if you can see them on the screen, but I have two different reading passages. One is A and one is B. In A, and I can just read A out loud. It says, in the famous Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen's drama A Dollhouse, the perfect ideal world of the protagonist Nora turns out to be a terrible false paradise, a dollhouse, which eventually is exposed for what it is at the dramatic climax, when the terrifying threat of unbearable social disgrace pressures Nora's dominating husband to show his true, unloving, selfish colors. So the idea is that in class I would read the first passage, or I might ask the students to read, or ask for a student to volunteer to read the passage. And then for B, we're going to compare it to the next passage, which is much shorter. In Ibsen's A Dollhouse, the perfect world of the protagonist, Nora, turns out to be a false paradise. At the climax, the threat of disgrace forces Nora's husband to show his true colors. Under pressure, he behaves selfishly without love. So what I would be asking my class at this point, after sharing the document, is to decide which they prefer, A or B. And this would allow us to have a little bit of discussion time. The discussion that I wrote out on my lesson is that passage A was adapted from a student essay, and that passage B is an edited version of the original. So this lends itself to different opportunities. You can talk a little bit about the author. You can also talk about student writing and how we want to try to model the best writing that we can based off of some of the authors that our material comes from. So if I were teaching this lesson, I would say I'd point out that A is really just one long sentence. It has complexity and momentum, but it feels clumsy because the words that are there are piled on too thickly. So in B, the same meaning is expressed more concisely. And one of the points that I always try to make with my students is that you always want to try to be as concise as possible. And this is the hard part of writing because, especially in student work I've had turned in, we have to do a lot of editing and kind of slicing things down to get it where we want to. But again, back to the piece, it doesn't mean that you should never write long, complex sentences or include details. There's a place for dense language, and long, complex sentences do have their own appeal. But in general, if you're trying to communicate information or ideas, you'll do it more effectively if you strip away the words that aren't needed. So for this lesson, I would now, so the introduction is the passage and then a little bit of background information. The lesson now, I would move into why do we want to omit unnecessary words. You can go into some detail and talk about why those words can slow down the reading. It can kind of bog you down in details that aren't really necessary. And it can also make it harder to express what you're trying to say. So as a writer, you want to make sure that you're always including only the most important information. And I would also now give a list. I have another exercise here. So I would talk about some of the repetitive words, and then I would talk about words that don't add meaning, maybe come up with some ideas about what we could write instead. And then I'm just kind of making it a little bit shorter because we only have 10 minutes. So I would now put on my board here wordy phrases. And again, I have a Word document here. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but I have a Word document that says these wordy phrases, and I have a list. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 phrases on the left-hand side, and then I have on the right, ... can be replaced with these, concise, and there's a list of words that can be used in its place. So for example, at the present time is my wordy phrase number 1, and that one can be replaced with either now, and then I have a semicolon, and currently. So I would also explain to the students, and depending on the time, this list you could probably do in about maybe 5 minutes, but you could also extend it if you wanted to, and have the students maybe write a sentence that goes with one of the more concise versions. So I do have that list, and then I have the class practice that would follow after this. So I would have my class work on the first sample sentence together. I would ask for volunteers. On this platform, I'm not completely sure how this would work. If I have a large class of students where I might be able to ask volunteers for suggestions, I could have students work in pairs to improve the sample sentences. And then you can also work on editing, say a paragraph that might have some of these examples on there. And then my final projection, again, for my my Word document, this should be on the screen as well. I would find the unnecessary word in the sentence. So I have in boldface at the top, find the unnecessary word, then rewrite the sentence using fewer words. And the example here is, to be sure, Anne Bradstreet was a great American writer, and she was an admirable person, more or less. And then right beneath that, it says, here are a few more sample sentences for the students to work on. So I have 1, 2, 3 sample sentences that are in italics. And again, I would let my students either work in pairs or individually to revise these sentences. And depending on the platform, they could either share these in class, or if you were using something like Google Docs, I guess they could complete it on there, and then I can just see the work immediately and share feedback. So I thought that these might be some great ideas, again, for this lesson. And I would like to allow time for discussing the different revisions that the students came up with. And I would also include a couple minutes for assigning homework. In this case, I would assign a few sentences to edit, asking them to trim away the unnecessary words again. And I have 1, 2, 3, there's 4 different examples that they could do for a homework assignment that's related to this lesson. I plan on submitting the Word documents with this video, and I had a couple different screen sharing softwares that I wanted to use for this lesson, but I also wanted to make sure that I knew what you generally used in class. So I don't know if it's screen sharing or if I'm uploading documents. When I taught for Bridgeway Academy, I used Jigsaw, and so all of my class material was preloaded for class, and then I was able to access it as I taught the lesson. So I am attaching my Word documents to this video sample that I'm going to upload, and I really look forward to hearing back from you. And thank you very much for looking at my sample lesson on how to delete unnecessary words from your writing. Bye.